He walked into that courtroom thinking he had already won. But when Melody's lawyer slid one document across the table, Martell's entire case collapsed in front of everyone. What was in those papers that left him completely speechless? Let's break it down. Martell unraveled in front of everyone the moment Melody's courtroom session took an unexpected turn. What surfaced that day wasn't just surprising, it rattled the entire room. This wasn't the usual legal sparring. The energy felt heavier, like history was being written in real time. Outside the courthouse, anticipation had already been brewing. By the time the doors opened, people were huddled in groups, whispering, updating social feeds, phones in hand, waiting for fireworks. And they got them. For many, it felt like the long-awaited conclusion to a saga that had dragged on too long. No one, however, imagined the finale would strike this hard. Martell had walked into the courtroom, as if the outcome had already been scripted in his favor. His stride was deliberate, almost theatrical, each step carrying the weight of his own soul. He nodded to familiar faces in the gallery, flashing the kind of smile that suggested he was already celebrating a win in his mind. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who believed he had not only prepared his case, but orchestrated a flawless takedown of his ex-wife. His entire strategy hinged on flipping the custody arrangement and reshaping how the courtroom the public saw Melody. In Martell's version of the story, she wasn't the devoted mother fans believed her to be. Instead, he framed her as a woman consumed by ambition, forever chasing fame through music, filming, and curating her image for the spotlight. He wanted to paint her as absent, distracted, and unreliable. His team leaned heavily on curated evidence, screenshots of social media posts, calendars dotted with travel dates, and production schedules that made it look like her children were perpetually second place. On the surface, when reduced to bullet points and slides, the narrative seemed tidy, even persuasive. But legal battles are not won on surface impressions alone. What looked convincing on paper quickly began to unravel under the scrutiny of the courtroom. For all the polish Martell's team tried to apply, the substance wasn't there. What Martell had completely underestimated was Melody's strength, the kind of strength that doesn't need to be loud or dramatic to be felt. When she walked into that room, she didn't carry herself like someone on trial. She carried herself like a woman who had been preparing, documenting, and standing firm long before this day arrived. Her composure spoke louder than any opening argument. It was the type of quiet power that turned heads, not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't have to. While Martell's side fumbled through their presentations, clicking through slides and pointing fingers, Melody remained still. She didn't flinch when accusations were hurled. She didn't rise to the bait when her name was framed in a negative light. She let them build their case, brick by shaky brick. And when her turn came, she allowed the facts to dismantle the structure without ever raising her voice. Her lawyers stood with precision, every movement deliberate, every word measured. There was no grandstanding, no wasted energy. Piece by piece, he laid out Melody's evidence. First came school attendance records, highlighting her consistency in ensuring the children were present, engaged, and thriving. Then came photographs captured not for publicity, but for memory, showing her at recitals, school events, birthdays, and moments that couldn't be faked. Teachers' notes followed, documenting her involvement, her communication, her reliability as a parent. Letters from neighbors added another layer, painting a picture of a mother who wasn't just present in her children's lives, but also embedded in her community. And then, perhaps most powerful of all, a written statement from the children's guardian underscored what all the paperwork had already begun to prove. Melody was steady. Melody was present. Melody was the anchor her children needed. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't emotional manipulation. It was truth, documented and undeniable. And as each item was presented, it built momentum, a wave of credibility that Martell's side couldn't counter. Then came the moment that altered the entire atmosphere. Just when it seemed Melody's team had revealed all their cards, her attorney reached for a fresh stack of documents. The shuffle of papers echoed in the silence, and immediately, the tone shifted. The judge leaned forward, curiosity sharpened. The gallery stilled. Even the restless scribbling of reporters came to a halt. Something was about to happen. These weren't just supplemental exhibits. They were the kind of evidence that doesn't merely defend, it dismantles. As the judge began to review them, the weight in the room became palpable. Every page contradicted Martell's central claims. Timelines that his team had presented as proof of Melody's absence were directly undercut. Statements he had made in filings were exposed as inconsistent with documented facts. What had once looked like a polished argument now resembled a carefully crafted illusion. The cracks widened quickly. It wasn't just that Martell's accusations were weak, it was that they were contrived. The documents made it clear that this wasn't an honest mistake or a difference in interpretation. It was an intentional effort to manufacture a narrative that collapsed the moment real evidence entered the frame, and everyone saw it happen in real time. Martell's posture shifted. The confident tilt of his head gave way to a downward stare. His hands fidgeted slightly. His jaw tightened. Witnesses would later recall the disbelief etched across his face. This was a man unaccustomed to silence. A man known for turning every platform into an opportunity to speak his version of events. But in that courtroom, stripped of spin and bravado, he had nothing to say. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst could have been. The gallery, which had been buzzing only minutes earlier, now sat in near total stillness. People exchanged glances but said nothing. Even the most seasoned reporters, who had come prepared to capture every dramatic soundbite, found themselves frozen, pens suspended above their notepads. The gravity of what had just unfolded left no room for theatrics. For Melody, this wasn't just vindication. It was confirmation of everything she had embodied leading up to this moment. She hadn't arrived with performance in mind. She hadn't tried to sway opinion through charisma or force of personality. She had trusted the strength of preparation, the clarity of facts, and the resilience of truth. The contrast could not have been sharper. On one side of the courtroom stood Martell, who had entered with swagger, determined to control the story through optics and bravado. On the other side sat Melody, who had walked in with quiet determination, intent not on winning a spectacle but on protecting her children and proving her reality. And in that contrast, the outcome became clear long before the gavel fell. What made the moment unforgettable wasn't just the collapse of Martell's argument, was the exposure of intent. The documents didn't merely show that Melody was a committed mother. They revealed that Martell's accusations were more than misguided. They were tactical, manipulative, and rooted in ego rather than concern. The courtroom could see it. The judge could see it. And perhaps most painfully of all, Martell himself could see it. As the session pressed on, whispers began again, but now they carried a different tone. This wasn't speculation or gossip, was the sound of realization spreading through the room. The energy had flipped, and no one could deny it. By the time Melody's lawyer finished, the battle had already been decided in spirit. Even before the official ruling, the documents had not only defended Melody, they had dismantled the entire foundation of Martell's case. What began as a confident march toward victory had ended in a silent unraveling, leaving Martell blinking under the weight of his own strategy backfiring. It was a masterclass in preparation, a reminder that in a courtroom, confidence is no substitute for truth. And on that day, truth didn't just speak, it roared. The entire atmosphere shifted in that silence. This case wasn't simply about winning an argument, it was about integrity, preparation, and respect for the process. Martell had tried to turn a courtroom into a stage for personal attacks, and it backfired. The judge saw through the facade without hesitation. As the final documents rested in the judge's hands, authority shifted firmly to Melody's side. Martell's early swagger evaporated. He sat rigid, blinking rapidly, the panic visible to anyone who cared to look. For the first time all day, he no longer resembled a man in control, just someone watching the walls close in. The turning point came when the judge fixed his gaze on Martell's attorney and asked a single, razor-sharp question. Is this really the basis of your argument? No theatrics, no gavel banging, just one line that cut sharper than any outburst ever could. Martell's lawyer faltered, muttering something about needing time to confirm, but the damage had already landed. The gallery stirred, uneasily whispers rippled through the room. Side glances darted across the benches, and even the bailiff seemed to fight back a reaction. Through it all, Melody sat still, hands folded, expression calm. She radiated the quiet poise of someone who had been 10 steps ahead all along. Martell had entered the room trying to bend the narrative to his advantage. Melody came to dismantle it entirely, and the ruling left no ambiguity. The judge didn't draw it out with theatrics, he swiftly denied Martell's push for tighter custody restrictions. Then, turning directly to him, he delivered a message that echoed through the chamber. Mr. Holt, this courtroom is not a stage for your personal vendettas. The well-being of your children comes first, not your ego. The air seemed to leave the room. Martell blinked, stunned, unable to form a response. He didn't glance at Melody, didn't speak a word. That one statement had stripped away all the posturing and exposed the truth beneath the noise. This fight was never about social media clout or pride. It was about the children, and Melody had kept her focus there all along. Behind her, Melody's mother, Miss Vanessa, wore a soft but unmistakably proud smile, the kind that said she'd seen this outcome coming. In contrast, some of Martell's own relatives looked crushed. One cousin, unable to mask his frustration, reportedly shook his head as if watching a wreck unfold in slow motion. When the gavel finally closed and the judge exited, the room exhaled into hushed motion. Chairs scraped back, papers shuffled, murmurs grew louder. But outside, the quiet cracked into chaos. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, cameras rolling, fans already live. When Melody emerged, she carried herself with the same calm grace she had shown inside. No victory laps, no theatrics, just steady composure. Yet the roar of support around her said everything. She had won. Not only the case, but the moment itself. Martell followed minutes later, storming out with his lawyer in tow. He offered no statement, no glance at the crowd, only a brisk walk to the car. The swagger he'd worn at the start of the day was gone. Reporters shouted questions, but he kept his head down. Almost instantly, the internet erupted. Within an hour, hashtags like #Melody1 and #SitDownMartell were trending. TikTok lives dissected the drama in real time, while Twitter threads broke down the courtroom play-by-play, zooming in on facial expressions, tone shifts, and that pivotal moment when the new evidence landed. Memes spread like wildfire. One showed Martell looking dazed with the caption, "When your plan flops mid-court." Another featured Melody calmly holding her folder, receipts greater than rumors. But beyond the jokes, there was an outpouring of respect for Melody. Many, especially women, saw her as a symbol of resilience. Someone who refused to let lies or ego weaponize the system against her. Her comment sections filled with praise. Thank yous for her strength, for her grace, for standing as an example of how to fight with dignity under fire. For Martell, the backlash was merciless. Fans accused him of manipulation, of dragging personal vendettas into a space meant for the children's welfare. Even neutral viewers began questioning his motives. Within the love and marriage, Huntsville circle, the fallout was immediate. Castmates couldn't stay silent. Kimmy reportedly confided admiration for Melody's maturity, while Marceau threw shade online, posting, "Some folks need to learn losing with grace is better than dragging your pride through the mud." Predictably, Miss Wanda jumped in on Facebook, defending Martell and accusing the judge of being too soft. But her comments only stoked the fire, with fans calling her out for enabling Martell's behavior instead of holding him accountable. And yet, beneath all the noise, the most important truth had been cemented. The children were no longer stuck in a tug-of-war, fueled by pride. The court had made it clear, their stability and peace came first, and nothing less would be entertained. For Melody, that was the real victory. She had fought, not for headlines or applause, but to shield her children from becoming pawns. She walked out not only with her custody rights intact, but with her dignity preserved. The win wasn't loud or messy. It was deliberate, rooted in facts, and grounded in truth. And that made it even more powerful. Martell, on the other hand, had to confront a sobering reality. The system would not bend to his ego. This was never about revenge. And it certainly wasn't about chasing the spotlight. For Melody, the courtroom wasn't a stage to perform on, it was a place to anchor herself in facts, in consistency, and in her children's well-being. At its core, this battle wasn't entertainment. It wasn't a dramatic subplot meant for cameras or ratings. It was about clarity, about stripping away illusions and showing, without a doubt, who had been living in truth. And when Martell's arguments were set side by side with Melody's carefully documented proof, the difference was stark. His claims didn't just come across as weak, they collapsed entirely under the weight of her receipts. The foundation he thought was strong enough to overturn custody didn't merely crack, it disintegrated. Every document Melody presented was another reminder that preparation always outshines performance, and truth always outlasts theatrics. But the impact didn't stop at the verdict. Even before the ink on the ruling was dry, conversations were already spilling outside the courtroom. With a new season of Love and Marriage, Huntsville looming, fans and viewers couldn't help but speculate about how this very public clash would shape the dynamics of the cast. Would Martell attempt to recast himself as the wounded party, leaning on victimhood to soften the blow to his image? Would he double down, turning bitterness into storyline and sparking more confrontations for the cameras? Or, though less likely, would he finally step back, shift his focus inward, and choose fatherhood over feuds? Social media lit up with predictions. Twitter threads dissected not only the evidence but also the body language, how Melody sat still, poised, while Martell fidgeted and blinked rapidly under pressure. TikTok creators uploaded side-by-side reenactments, some humorous, others analytical, showing how quickly the energy of the courtroom flipped. Reddit forums became think tanks, debating whether Martell would learn from the humiliation or escalate it further in future episodes. And while speculation swirled, one reality had already crystallized: Melody had changed the game. She reminded everyone watching, whether in that courtroom or at home, scrolling through updates, that power doesn't always come from the loudest voice. Sometimes it's found in composure, in patience, in the ability to wait for the right moment and let the facts do the speaking. Melody embodied the truth that dignity is not passive, it's deliberate. She didn't need to match Martell's energy, she needed only to stay grounded in her own. For fans who had followed their tumultuous journey over the years, this was more than a custody win. It was a moment of symbolic justice. Many women online said they saw themselves in Melody's.com resistance, in her refusal to be baited into chaos. Her stance became a model of how to handle conflict with grace, of how to fight back without losing yourself in the process. Comment sections overflowed with gratitude, people thanking her for showing that strength doesn't have to roar. It can whisper and still be heard. Meanwhile, the fallout for Martell was brutal. Public opinion, once divided, tilted sharply against him. Viewers who might have sympathized with his frustrations were now questioning his motives entirely. The narrative he had tried to build unraveled, not just in court, but across every social platform. What once looked like an attempt to protect his children now looked like an attempt to punish their mother. And the court's ruling, paired with the judge's sharp words, only cemented that interpretation. This clash also forced a larger conversation in the fandom and beyond. It became about more than just Martell and Melody. It became about how often courts, families, and communities see parenting weaponized as a tool of control. It became about the dangers of ego overshadowing responsibility. For many, the case was personal, triggering memories of their own custody battles, their own struggles with co-parenting, or their own fights to prove dedication in the face of doubt. Melody's victory resonated because it wasn't just hers, it felt collective. As discussions spilled into blogs, podcasts, and reaction channels, one phrase kept echoing: she reset the tone. That reset wasn't just for Martell, it was for the entire cast dynamic. With the world watching, Melody raised the standard of how conflict could be handled through preparation, through discipline, and through an unshakable commitment to the bigger picture. Whether Martell chooses to escalate or retreat in the coming season, the balance of power has already shifted. Fans now know that Melody doesn't just survive adversity, she transforms it into clarity. And perhaps that's what makes her win feel so monumental. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't messy, and it wasn't about humiliating her opponent. It was measured, it was precise, it was anchored in something much stronger than pride. By keeping her focus on her children and her truth, Melody demonstrated a kind of resilience that can't be undone with insults, spin, or tags. In the end, her message was clear: ego fades, theatrics backfire, but truth paired with patience and preparation always stands, no matter how many times someone tries to discredit her, no matter how often she's tested. Melody showed that she's not just ready for the fight, she's already mastered the art of winning it with grace.